everyone. Welcome to Show and Tell. If you haven't been here before, this is our live stream where the TBD team shows and tells you about the latest, greatest open source project or concept at TBD because we love to be open about what we're working on. So during the show, whether you're on Twitch, LinkedIn, YouTube, Discord, Twitter, you can drop questions in the chat. We will answer them during and in this later half of our show. So I'm your host and moderator, Tanya, and joining us as our speaker for the day is Kendall. Say hi to everybody. Give a quick intro to yourself.
Hello. Yes, I was just here about a month ago, so I'm becoming a regular, I guess.
Exactly.
But for those who don't know, I'm an engineer at TBD. I work primarily on a lot of our open source initiatives. So that's why I'm here. We're going to talk about something open source.
Awesome. So what is the topic for today? And you can get right into it.
Yeah. So the topic is, this is going to be fairly informal. It's going to be very devy. Tanya, I encourage you to interrupt me at any point and ask questions or interact. The topic of today is what we call the Web5 CLI. CLI, for those who don't know, is an abbreviation for command line interface. So basically, it's a tool that offers Web5 features, but through a terminal interface. We're going to go through it. I have sort of a schedule. We can walk through various things. The thing I want to say up front is that this is very much a half-baked thing, and it's by no means a 1.0 product. It's very much under active development. I say that because I encourage contributions here. I think it's a great area for contributions for open source contributors, and there's a lot of agency and decision making that can be made out in the open here with this tool. So I think the CLI is one of my favorite projects that we do here at TBD, even though it's very, very half-baked. I think a CLI ends up being actually one of the most useful or valuable tools in a developer's tool belt, because we all have different engineering styles, but I think most of engineering work can be distilled down to either writing text in some sort of code editor, be that like a full-fledged IDE or just a basic text editor, and then executing commands at a terminal. And oftentimes, even if you are using heavily feature-rich integrative development environment such as IntelliJ, oftentimes you're using features within the GUI, such as execute this test or do something, refactor something. Oftentimes under the hood, that graphical user interface is actually calling a command line interface tool. Sometimes these GUIs actually do have native integrations into language binding SDKs, such as like a Kotlin SDK. It will directly call that. But surprisingly, oftentimes it's actually calling the CLI. It's literally just calling a command line execution. Furthermore, CLI tools are very commonplace, especially among a lot of SysOps engineers. So DevOps engineers, people who are working in cloud environments and deployment pipelines, these types of things. It's actually commonplace for applications to be actually bash scripts, and the bash script just wraps a CLI. It's like a lot of old school developers, we these days we typically will write like a full-fledged TypeScript app or a Python app, but in a lot of environments, actually, it's just people writing bash scripts and just calling command line tools. So the CLI is very exciting for me because I think that it's something that is very useful and sort of undertapped, and also relatively easy to build, I think, actually. So I think there's just like the perfect convergence of a lot of different things.
That's awesome. Before you continue, one great question that feels relevant right now. What are the situations or use cases where a developer would need to leverage the Web5 CLI rather than the SDK in your IDE?
Okay, so great question. So yeah, I think of two major buckets for use cases here. The first bucket is just purely development or debugging. And so oftentimes you may have some sort of Web5 resource like a DID document or a portable DID or a DID URI or a verifiable credential or a JOT. You'll have some sort of resource that is a Web5 resource. And for some reason, it's not working in your application the way that you expect it to. And one solution would be to set a breakpoint in your application and then step through the application and debug it. But another thing you could do is just actually take that resource and just really quickly, let me just pass it into the Web5 CLI, and maybe I can decode it without like doing some sort of validation or verification. I don't care what's wrong. I just want to see it maybe. So there's a whole slew of development or debugging purposes of like, let me just quick and dirty. I have this resource. Let me throw it into the CLI. Let's see what happens to it. That's one bucket. Another major bucket is what I call administrative features. So things like DIDs and VCs are there's sort of two different classes for these resources or these concepts. One class is you're building an application that where the user is directly interfacing with these concepts. So they are literally creating an identity, or they're updating their identity, or they're creating a credential, or they're reviewing their credentials. They're directly interfacing with it. Oftentimes, though, especially in business use cases, the DIDs and VCs or the resources are utilized by the application, but they're actually disintermediated through the application. So the developer isn't directly interfacing with them. One example of this would be, you could imagine a TBDEX experience for the user where a lot of the assets are actually hosted by the business in a cloud environment instead of, it's not a local peer-to-peer, it's actually hosted by a business on behalf of the user. In these use cases, the user isn't directly interfacing with the DID. Instead, what it is that the business has a requirement to administratively create an asset. And it's sort of like a one-time shot. We create our identity, we store it securely in our resources, but then like it's not really mutated. Like, maybe over time we need to mutate it. We need to add a service endpoint, or we need to maybe issue a new credential because this is expired. Very infrequent interfacing with these assets. In those use cases, it doesn't quite make as much sense to build a full-fledged like API or a full-fledged cloud stack for these resources. Instead, you can literally just have like your security admin like execute a command like, hey, there's a new triage. We have a new feature coming down the line. It's in our workflow. By this date, we need to add a service endpoint to our DID. And for that to happen, you need to have a person who has the right access to those resources, and they just have to literally execute a command. So it's like, just execute the command, and then it's done. Okay, that was very long-winded, but yeah, there's two big buckets. There's like development purposes, and then there's like administrative production purposes. Yeah.
Yeah, and as Giselle said in chat, so for debugging, validation, and administration, especially when it's an infrequent occurrence, yeah, I think that's
Exactly.
helpful.
Yeah. That's the way to put it. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
So those are the two use cases. I'm sure there's more too. I mean, CLIs are always useful in a lot of variety of use cases. Okay, so I want to talk about some of our approach to the CLI, and I'm going to share my screen. And we should be able to see my screen right now. Tanya, are you actually here?
Yes.
Okay, you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can take this.
Feel free to zoom in just a bit.
Okay, yeah. Please let me know if you can't see.
There you go. Perfect.
Let me go one out actually. Yeah, we can take this a number of different ways how we want to talk about this. So feel free to interrupt and ask questions. I encourage that. It's very fun and useful. I wanted to start out actually by showing something slightly different, which is our Web5 specification, which is currently in a draft state, so it's not considered to be published quite yet. But it is very there's a lot of substance here which we can key off of. I think it's useful to look at the Web5 specification to understand like what are the sort of high level features of Web5, because the idea is that we want the CLI to sort of mimic what's in the set of features described in the specification. So the main things you'll see here are DIDs, VCs, presentation exchange, and then there's some features around JSON schemas and cryptographic primitives and key management. These three are things actually that I think would be great to add to the CLI. They're sort of they're more advanced, or they're less low hanging fruit. They're less of a priority, so they're not actually in there right now, and we haven't even really ideated much about those. But those could be in there too. I want to pause real quick, actually, and just highlight that we have Hacktoberfest coming up, right? And in my opinion, some of the most exciting Hacktoberfest items could be CLI contributions. So we have some issues on the backlog, and I'm sure that DevRel will aggregate these and make them pretty for the community, or accessible. But I think these are great, and I think there could even be more. And like part of Hacktoberfest could also be like just bring your own idea. Like it doesn't have to be. There's a whole slew of things that could be added to the CLI. So I very much promote that. Some of which could be like, we haven't even talked about this. I'm literally just stream of consciousness saying it, but we could actually add JSON schema support. Like we could add full-fledged, like, here's a schema, here's my resource, execute validation. That would be awesome. So okay, this is a specification. Let's move on. Okay, let me actually take a step back. The CLI is written in Rust. So we have this whole Rust core initiative. That's what I was here last month to talk about. It's right now the Rust core initiative is basically three things. It's the actual Rust crate, the Rust implementation of the SDK across both Web5 and TBDEX. Which actually we should talk about TBDEX CLI too. Hold on one second. This is my roadmap. This would be exciting to talk about. So the Rust core is basically two things, right? It's like the Rust implementation. We currently have a Kotlin bound SDK. It's a little bit in the work in progress, but we're wrapping that up. It's about done. And then the third thing is the CLI. So the CLI is in the Rust core initiative, which means it's written in Rust. I'm going to get to some of the actual code stuff. We may poke around some actual development stuff in a second, but that's where you can find it. As a part of the Rust core initiative, there's sort of like this pipeline, right? There's like specification first, and then we have to somehow design the specification to be like accessible programmatically, right? So actual API calls. So that's what this document is. I think I talked about this last month. This is what I call the APID, which is like, it's intended to be a language independent API design. So like if we go down to verifiable credential, you'll see that there's like this syntax, which is intended to spread across any implementation of the Web5 SDK. So you can see like you can create a verifiable credential. You can also assign it. The reason why I bring this up is because I have this vision in my head. It's not totally like that right now, totally like this right now, and it may actually not be totally feasible. But I think actually that the Web5 CLI should roughly follow our API design as well. I'm like expressing a little bit of skepticism because the interface between like a programmatic binding, or sorry, a programmatic interface via like a function call, like if you're writing Python and you're calling a function, that's slightly different. It's a slightly different interface than a command line interface. A command line interface, although the feature set is probably still roughly equivalent, it's like sufficiently different where it may be a little bit weird to try and map this API design onto a command line interface. However, I think we should try, because I think it would be amazing if we had every single SDK implemented which matched the API design, and then also the Web5 CLI matched the API design. It would make documentation very coherent, consistent, and and it would be amazing. So I would propose if we want to add features to the CLI, roughly try to match the API design in whatever way that works at a command line interface. Okay, here is the actual CLI. Like here's where the code is housed. So you can see we're in the Web5 Rust repo. We're inside of crates, and then one of our crates is Web5, of course, and the other crate is Web5 CLI. If we go into our cargo toml, you'll see there's a dependency on Web5. So basically, the way it works is that the CLI is it's just another Rust app. The difference is that the CLI is an executable, right? So it's not a library. The Web5 crate is actually a library, whereas the Web5 CLI is an executable. And basically, the CLI executable is it's really just a thin wrapper around the Web5 CLI. It's not intended to have a whole bunch of custom unique features. It's kind of just like an interface into the existing functionality made available through the Web5 SDK. That's why I think we should aspire to try and match the API design, because it would just be totally one for one, like effectively like a proxy pass through to the actual SDK code. Here's where it is. We currently have, we do have a release out. It's kind of an arbitrary number right now. A lot of this is very much in flux. It's just mostly just to get things out there. There's a lot of moving pieces, but we do have a release here, and it has support for 2 different Linux architectures and 2 different Apple architectures. Tanya, actually, one of the things I wanted to bring to you and Rizal is we should add a issue on the Hacktoberfest backlog to build this for Windows too. Windows is like slightly different. I'm not really a Windows dev, so I don't want to speak out of step here, but be it we either make it accessible for Windows Bash or Windows PowerShell or something, I think it would be amazing if we added Windows support here too.
Noted.
Cool. So yeah, we do have a release, and you can actually download these and run them, and they work. I'm gonna showcase that in a moment. There's also this install script. So we're actually gonna do this live.
Feel free to zoom in just a bit more if you can.
Yeah.
There you go.
Sorry, my monitor is, I'm not using my monitor right now. So we do have an install script. The good thing about this install script is we can actually execute a single line curl command, which will download and install the CLI for your given architecture automatically. I'm going to show that in a moment. You can see that there's basically Linux and Apple, but there's no Windows here. So yeah, that's the install command. Let's install it. Let me make sure. Yeah, okay, cool. So that's the command. Okay, so I'm on main. Let me see, actually. I actually currently have it installed, so I want to uninstall it. Here's where it installs to. So yeah, you can see I already have it installed, but let's remove that. So I need to do something a little funky here. I need to actually go out of my Git repo temporarily. I'm going to tell you why here in a second. I have a Web5 directory here, which has all of our various Web5 implementations. By the way, I need to archive rs old. All right, just doing a little house cleaning live on the air. Okay, so yeah, right now, if I'm not inside my Git repo, if I execute, let me make this a smidge bigger, too big. If I execute Web5 help, you'll see it's complaining there's no such thing found. I don't know what Web5 is. So we don't currently have it installed. So if we execute this curl command, which I want to add this to the README, it's not currently in the README, but if we execute this, what we're doing is we are grabbing the install script from the main branch, and we're passing in the version that we want to install, which is the latest version, which I showed you a moment ago. If we execute that, and I have to enter my password, and it didn't like that. Interesting. Okay, let's debug it live. We said this was going to be half-baked, so download.
Well, the good thing is as you debug it live, if anybody else ran into this, they could see you solve it.
Definitely. So what? So it's complaining about the remove command. Oh, right. So it looks like it's, okay. So I think we have a bug here. So file name is actually equal to that. I think I might need to, do I need to sudo this? Is that my problem? Remove Apple Arch Darwin. Well, phooey. Okay. Let's give this a go. Go into Rust, go into my crates, go into Web5 CLI. It's expecting a version, so here's my install script, v0.0.4. So it does find the right file name, but it must not be. It's not downloading it correctly. Well, okay. Debugging it live is not working very well. Let's push further. Come on, we can do this. File name.
We believe, we're here.
I have a backup plan. There's no sweat if we can't.
Yeah.
So you can see the file name. Web5 Arch Apple Darwin. I think the problem might be, it's because it's a zip file. We removed the zip functionality. So I think actually we need to, let's add a zip here. Okay, that did it. But then we need to unzip it. All right, I'm almost close to giving up, and going to plan B because I don't want to waste too much time, but let's try one more thing. Okay, there it is. I forget the unzip command. That's my only problem. Okay, well, we failed on using the actual one. That's an official bug, so we will fix that. I'll tell you what we're going to do as a plan B. As a plan B, I was going to show you this anyway, actually. It's just, it was going to be a slightly different thing, is that so we can actually use the Web5 CLI built from source if we're inside of our Git repository. If you remember, originally I had to go outside of our Git repository. So if I go outside of my Git repository and then do Web5 help, it doesn't work. But if I go inside my repository and do Web5 help, it will actually, it uses Hermit. And what it does is Hermit will actually execute this Web5 script. It's a bash script, which runs a build basically. And then we basically execute the build output. So the build goes into the target and it is right there. That's the binary. That's the executable that gets built. So we can still use it. And this actually uses it in the local environment. And the reason why that's helpful is because if you want to, sheesh, I'm all over the place. If you want to actually do some development, then this is a great way to do it. And I'm going to show you an example here. This is the main function inside of the CLI. If I add a print statement here and say, hello world, and I save that file, and then I re-execute my Web5 command inside of the Git repository, you can see it rebuilds it, and then you can see hello world shows up there. So if you do want to make changes, it's really simple. You just go into the Git repository and you just execute the Web5 command. It's using your local executable, not the one on your system. The install script is supposed to install the CLI to your system. A lot of this is kind of lower level trickery, but okay, so we can execute it. I think what we should do is I want to show some of the usage and then poke around the code a little bit. Don't want to do too much. Don't want to overwhelm with code. And then we could talk about some of the missing features and talk about maybe what we could add during the Hacktoberfest. So, okay, let's do it. So if we execute Web5 help, that gives us our a nice useful help message. You can see basically right now there are two different features that are roughly supported. We don't have full support within each feature, but they're roughly supported. There are DIDs and VCs. If we drill down further and do Web5 did help, you can actually see within the did command what's our subcommands. And right now we can both create and resolve. So I think what we should do is let's create a did and then we'll resolve it. And then we'll actually use the did that we created in a VC to create a VC. So if we do Web5, let me make this a smidge bigger. I wish I could. Here's what I want to do actually. I want to do this in my terminal. It's like a little bit better of a viewing experience, I think. So Web5 did help. So Web5, let's create a did first. By the way, you can continue to help all the way through your commands. So we can actually create 3 different types of dids. In accordance with our spec, we support 3 different methods: JWK, web, and DHT. The safest bet is going to be to create a JWK. We're going to try actually all of them, but let's see what we have available within JWK. Okay, I'm going to show you those 2 options here in a moment, but first let's just create a JWK. All right, boom. So it worked, fortunately. No more debugging. What it does is it prints out the portable did. So the portable did is, it's the did URI, which is the identifier for a decentralized identifier. It's also the did document. The document includes, semantic material such as verification methods. And then a portable did also includes the private keys. This is really important actually, which is that portable dids are primarily intended more for development environments and not really intended for production level environments. You generally want to, it's ill-advised to serialize private key material into plain text and make it available inside a terminal like this. There are security mechanisms you can use to make this okay, but I just want to make it clear that serializing private key material mostly should be constrained to development or staging environments and not for production environments. If you do need to serialize private key material for production environment, make sure you hit up a security specialist and they can help you through how to do that safely. On that note, right now the CLI doesn't have any features for hooking into like secure enclaves. The world of secure enclaves of holding private key material is very fragmented, and there's no sort of go-to solution for holding private key material. Like on Apple devices, Apple has Apple Keychain, so you could technically build a feature for the Web5 CLI to hook into your Apple Keychain to store your private key material. That's one potential solution. You could build a CLI feature to hook into AWS. AWS offers a couple different secret key material solutions, namely KMS and AWS Secrets Manager. So you could build features to hook into AWS for private key material. This is just my bias, of course. At Block we have this amazing product called BitKey. BitKey is an actual hardware wallet for Bitcoin storage. It's not currently like the feature support wouldn't be made available today for BitKey to hold like DID private key material, but it is technically possible, is what I would say. And it would actually span to any number of hardware key devices. There's a sort of burgeoning industry of building hardware devices which specifically hold private key material. So long way of saying you could build a CLI to hook into those things too. There's a whole suite of things. For now, it's serialized in plain text. Okay. I wanted to show these. We are doing well on time. I wanted to show these two little features, which I think are uniquely useful for development environments. Because oftentimes what you'll do is you will create a portable DID like this, and then you'll want to use it in your code. But then if you just copy and paste this, because it has new lines and indents, it has a bunch of white space in it. Oftentimes, depending on the language you're in, copy and pasting this into your code or inside of a config or inside of some like single text variable is kind of a headache. So you can actually use both of these features to make that easier. If you do no indent, then it'll print the portable DID all on a single line. So you can actually copy and paste that, boom, right there, which is very, very it's a headache if you don't have that. And then JSON escape is in a similar vein. Oftentimes you want to directly, this is fine. Oftentimes you want to copy and paste it directly into a string, but JSON has double quotes. And if your string is surrounded by double quotes, you actually have to escape your inner double quotes. And so you can see everywhere where there's a double quote here, it actually escapes it. Oftentimes, probably these would actually be used together. So you would end up doing both no indent and JSON escape. So then you can just copy and paste that directly into a double quoted string variable in your IDE. These are like little features, which I think they showcase like all the fun you can have with a CLI to really like nail it down and make it useful for developers. And it's relatively easy to add those features. You just add like, an if statement inside of your CLI code, which is like, if they pass in JSON escape, then replace all my double quotes with an escape double quote. So I think you can have a lot of fun with these things. Okay, just for fun, let's see if we can create a did web. Did web actually has a required parameter. You have to pass in a domain, because in order for a did web to be valid, it has to have a domain name. So we pass in tbd.website, and then it creates our portable did. you can see that's the did URI value, and that's it. And then did DHT, we can create did DHTs. This will actually publish the did DHT, if I recall correctly. We can check the code, but it will actually create the did DHT and publish it to mainline. So this is a networked call, whereas the did web doesn't publish it, it just creates it locally. I think one of the features we could definitely beef up did DHT quite a bit. So there is a no publish feature flag here, but one of the things that we need to add for the did DHT support in the Web5 CLI is the ability to update, because did DHT methods, did DHT documents can be mutated. They can have services added or verification methods added. So we could add a mutation interface, as well as deactivation. So did DHT is published to mainline, it can also be deactivated. That's currently not supported here, but those things could be added. Okay, cool. So let's stick with JWK because I feel the most safe with JWK while doing a demo. And what we're going to do now is resolve it. So Web5 did resolve, and we pass, let's just see actually what our arguments are, the URI. So we just have to pass in the URI. That's not right. This is a did URI. Resolve, and bada boom. There's your resolution result. Actually, it's just a did document. So it doesn't include any sort of resolution result material such as the metadata, but that probably should be added. So yet another feature which could be added. Okay, we can resolve the other ones, but I think we got the point. Let's try VC. So with VCs, we can create and we can verify. If we want to create, what do we have to do? We have to send in a credential subject. For their credential subject, let's use the JWK we just created. And okay, so we also need an issuer. Let's make the issuer the same value. So it's a self-issued credential. And there you go. So we created a credential with the JWK value we saw as the credential subject. And then we made the issuer the same value. And then you can see here is the credential in JSON format. Now, credentials, to be useful, typically are represented as VC JOTs, JWT tokens, JSON web tokens. And in order to create a JWT, we have to pass in the ability to sign the JWT, which means we have to pass in the portable did, which we created which includes our private key material. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another JWK. I'm going to no indent it so I can copy and paste it. Then what I'm going to do is we're going to re-execute our create command that we just executed. This time, instead of passing in the issuer, we can pass in a portable did, and it automatically is recognized as that's the issuer. And we have to surround it in single quotes. And then this should actually sign it as a JWT. And signer not found. Okay, we may have just discovered another bug. Obviously, we need a lot of love here. We need to nail down these bugs. So it was supposed to print out the JWT right here, but it's not printing it out because the JOT creation algorithm seems to be failing. So instead, what we'll try is there's a second VC command that's to verify. Let's try this actually. Let's try to create a did DHT and no indent it. And then let's try to use the did DHT. maybe it's a bug specific to JWK. No, same issue. Okay, well, that's sad. For the file a bug, for those who, let me just showcase what it was supposed to do. One second, I just need to make this a little bit smaller. Really, it's supposed to build a JWT that we all know and love that looks like this. And then what we could do if we had that is we could pass in the JWT to the verify command. Now this is, the thing I just copied is from one of our unit tests, and it's actually an invalid JWT. So it should actually fail. Yeah, verification failed. And actually the resolution is an invalid DID, which is the unit test we created. Let me see really quick though, if we can get a valid VC. So I'm just gonna really quick hack this together. I know my screen is kind of small right now, but just bear with me. Okay, this should be a valid one. So, we're over here, that's right. Let's try to verify this one, which should be valid. And voila, verified, yay. Okay, that one worked, yay. We even have a nice little emoji in our result. And what it does is it verifies it cryptographically, and then it also will decode it. And so it shows you the credential in JSON representation form. Okay, I have been talking away. Tanya, anything we want to talk about here? Or do we want to move on to some of the future features we could add in some of the Hacktoberfest items?
Yeah, so we can talk about that in a moment, but I had some questions I prepared during. Some of them also jumped into future features. Just one question that I thought of, which is, let's say someone's getting started with learning Web5, like how or when can they work with the Web5 CLI? I understand it's in early stages and stuff, but maybe it's something they may want to contribute towards too.
That's right. So as you can see on the number of failings that we've had on this call, the CLI needs some love. It is functional, so you can use it. But as it stands today, it does require a little bit of contextual awareness to use it, as I said. So really what we should do is we should update the README and add the install script to the README. And then that way people can just execute a single script and it'll download it and install it and it'll actually work. So we'll have to fix that bug as well. And in that world, you could use it today with the four main features we went through, right? So DID creation, DID resolution, VC creation, and there are some more bugs in there, which obviously we'll have to fix those too. So it does need a little love. However, it is sort of quasi-usable right now. And then, yeah, I would encourage contributions here. It is written in Rust. So if it may be a little bit daunting to write some Rust code if people have never written Rust, but I will say that the CLI project the Rust code it's very simple. Like it's basically just a wrapper around the Web5 Rust code, which is where all the complexity is. So in some sense, if you're daring enough to write a little bit of Rust, I think it's actually a great project to learn Rust because it's pretty simple. And honestly, you can just pass it into any number of these LLMs and it'll tell you exactly what to do. That's how simple it is.
Awesome. Yeah. I think from here we can jump right into the future features to start with and go from there for the remaining time.
Yeah. So I can share my screen here in a minute if we want to, but I think maybe I'll just talk a little bit for a moment. So there's the core, the meat of Web5 is DIDs and VCs, and that's why we've prioritized those features first. However, as you can see from just going through the demo, even those features, although there is existing implementation, we could drill those down further. So I talked about the DID DHT, so we could talk about so the ability to mutate the DHT document as well as to deactivate it. I guess he picks up on my thumbs up. One feature which would be very daring that I would like to add would be the ability to publish a did web document. Now, this would require actually going into the Web5 code and adding some feature set there. On that note, though, I would say that if you're implementing a Web5 CLI feature and it requires going into the Web5 code, I promote that too. Like, I would advocate, propose changes to the actual Web5 code base. That's very welcomed. Some of that's more complex. So if it scares you away, don't be afraid to ask for help there. So yeah, the things that we have Hacktoberfest coming up. We have some existing items. We can go through some of them if we want, but there's a whole slew of things we can add here. One of the things I would like to add is making the installation better. So right now we have that install script, which a lot of CLIs offer that as sort of like the baseline way to execute installation. If you go to Homebrew, like right on their homepage is like execute this curl command. It does the same exact set of things that the CLI does, which is it installs it to your system. But these days, there's a lot of really good package managers. So Homebrew is a package manager, APK, apt-get, I think it's apt on Ubuntu. Mac actually has what's the Mac? Mac has a package manager too. I'm blanking on it. Anyway, I think it would be amazing if we actually made the CLI, if we publish the CLI to those package managers. So then you could do like a brew install Web5. Like if we brew install Web5, we've made it. That's a really big win right there. So installation is a big area. And then I talked a lot about like some of the more advanced stuff would be cryptography related. So key management. Right now, we just serialize the private keys in plain text as a portable DID. But for this to really be production grade and to be used in a lot of enterprise environments, probably you have to offer hooks into existing cryptography solutions such as Keychain or AWS, these types of things. And then I'll just say two more things, and then we can go into maybe more specific if we want to. But there's no JWT. There's no like Jose feature set in the Web5 CLI right now. But as a part of TBDEX, we have this thing called the known customer credential flow. The known customer credential flow is an OpenID Connect. It's a specification of a combination of multiple different specifications, which intends to issue credentials for known customers, effectively like a KYC flow. And that flow is very heavy in JWTs. Like there's a lot of JWTs that are involved in the KCC. And so I think that we should offer JWT features for the Web5 CLI. The same way most people go to jot.io, right? So you have a JWT, go to jot.io, copy, paste, then you have it decoded. Basically, I think we should offer the same exact feature set of decoding the JOTs in the Web5 CLI. And then, there's a number of features that are specific to Web5, which would make it more attractive than going to jot.io actually. So if you were a KCC developer and you're actively developing a KCC flow, I think it makes sense for you to actually use the Web5 CLI rather than going to jot.io. So that's one big thing that we don't have. The other thing is JSON schemas. So JSON schema is a big part of the Web5 specification, and we have JSON schema code in the Web5 SDK. However, we don't have access to that publicly, and we don't have access to that in the Web5 CLI. So I think adding JSON schema support would be a big win, specifically around that development use case, because during development, JSON schemas can be really tricky sometimes. They fail, you don't really know why. So if you had a developer or a CLI tool for trying to debug those use cases, I think it would be very valuable. Okay, those are some of the big overarching initiatives. We can drill into some if we want. One thing I had one pulled up around VCs. Like we could talk about a specific use case of adding things to VCs if we wanted to, or Tanya, I'll throw it over to you. Where do we want to go with this?
I think we can go into, unless anybody says otherwise in chat, I think adding to VCs is great. And something I wanted to add to what you mentioned, I have seen before when it comes to new users or developers for Web5 when they're just getting into it, having to go to jot.io, like even though it's just very like it's a simple enough thing, but being able to do everything in one single environment can be very important and sometimes a barrier for people whether they think about it or not. So yeah.
I totally agree. And like I said, you could a lot of these IDE calls, like VS Code, you could build an extension which is actually a developer tool, which would be specific to like Web5 jots, if you're developing for like the KCC flow. So I decorate that with Web5 jot because these jots are jots. They are conformant to the jot standard. But what we do with Web5 is sort of an abstraction on top of a lot of these standards. So like we do some things that are hard requirements for Web5 within our jots. For example, the Jose header KID field has to be a DID verification method ID. If it's not that, then it's invalid. So that's like a perfect use case of like, if you were to even go to jot.io with that, it wouldn't actually show you anything. Like it wouldn't be like, this is invalid for Web5 because the ID is wrong. But like we could build tooling with the CLI, which is like, this is invalid. It's a valid jot, but it's invalid for Web5 specifically because the KID field is incorrect. So I totally agree. Okay, we could talk about feature, VC feature. I wanted to tee this up. We don't have to spend more than 5 minutes here. I think we're up against our time anyway.
Yeah,
But
we can end it on that.
yeah, so this is a ticket that Rizal created as a part of the Hacktoberfest items. If you go to the Web5 RS issue backlog, you'll see a number of items with that are related to Hacktoberfest. And as we've learned from this call, we will be adding more to those regarding some of the issues that we've had. This one stood out. This would be a little bit of a complex one, but I think it's a good item to illustrate some of the solution around the CLI. So the idea here is that basically we want to enable passing in additional properties to creating VCs. And Rizal wrote this out. This is a great ticket. I recommend if you want to work on this item, you should read it, obviously. I wanted to go into actually some of the code specifics to illustrate some of the details. So if we go into, I'm actually going to go into the code base here. If we go into the Web5 crate and we open up verifiable credentials, one second, actually, I wanted to pull up. Yeah, that's not where I wanted to go. Sorry. When we create a verifiable credential, we have this structure, which is basically it's an object for a bunch of the different options. So when you create a VC, you have like a bare bones basic requirement. Like you have to have an issuer and you have to have a credential subject. Those are requirements for Web5 VCs. That's like the bare bones basics. But our API design offers additional options. So beyond the bare bones requirements, you can also like add an additional type. So like it's required that the type array includes a verifiable credential, but you could also add like a known customer credential type or like a statusless credential type, as well as, and then there's a whole slew of other options, right? So there's options around credential schema, expiration date. You can actually specifically set the ID. If you don't specifically set the ID, it's auto-generated. You can override that in the options. So the idea here is right now, the CLI doesn't actually expose any of these options. If you recall, whenever we executed the Web5 VC create, it required two things. It required the subject and it required the issuer. Those are the two things that we had to pass in because those are required. but there's a whole slew of other options which could be passed in, which would match the API design. So I think that's at the heart of that issue, is that we can extend the interface to pass in additional parameters to pass in those options. And I will end on this. If you wanted to do that, the way you would do it is, here's the CLI create. If you go into the source code, we have this main function, which has our two different commands, and then commands actually, or sorry, the VC command executes this, and then you can see like, here's our current create command. These are the options we offer. The subject ID is required. The issuer, the portable DID, one of these has to be provided. We actually currently offer an expiration date, so you can pass an expiration date. And if we scroll down, you'll see that it actually currently even uses that in the options. But basically, yeah, we could add additional options there to the interface and then pass them into the SDK call we make here. And that's it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, so if you have any questions, you can feel free to join our Discord, where we will be able to answer any questions you may have that came up either during the show or after you maybe watch the stream back. But otherwise, we will be having, a lot for everybody to contribute towards for Hacktoberfest. So stay tuned on that, including the Web5 CLI, which will be awesome. So yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in. And if you missed any part of the stream, don't worry. As soon as the stream ends, it will be available to immediately watch on our YouTube. So yeah. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.